You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Given the point of crisis that Cincinnati has reached in the past month, it is difficult to distinguish and keep separate the various threads of the challenge before us. One of those threads is the anger in the African American community over a perceived pattern of racial profiling in police traffic stops and other police community interactions. In early 2001, the Black United Front and the American Civil Liberties Union gathered testimony from people in the community in preparation for filing a class action lawsuit in mid-March. 5 weeks later, the Black United Front, the ACLU, the City of Cincinnati, and the FOP agreed to mediate the dispute through a collaborative process of negotiations rather than go to court. The mediation process will be designed and run by the ARIA group of Yellow Springs, Ohio. In the first stage, the ARIA group will spend 4 to 5 months gathering community comments. The ARIA group will then select the best ideas for solutions suggested by the community and developed by the participants during the work process. The findings will be presented to the parties in the racial profiling lawsuit. It's then up to the parties in the lawsuit to turn those recommendations into a legal settlement, which will be presented to a federal judge for approval. The entire process is expected to take about a year to complete. To discuss this community-based process, I am joined by Jay Rothman, the president of the ARIA Group. Dr. Rothman served as the coordinator of peace and conflict studies programs at Bryn Mawr, as well as Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has helped train leaders of conflicted groups in the Middle East, in Cyprus, in the Caucasus, in the former Soviet Union, and in Northern Ireland in the process of conflict resolution. Jay, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to Cincinnati.
Thanks.
In many ways.
I'm glad to be in both places.
You know, there have been a lot of studies over the past several decades about police-community relations. In the 1980s, that resulted in the creation of the Office of Municipal Investigations, OMI. In the 1990s, one of those resulted in the creation of the Police Community Relations Commission, which came into being and is now. What is it that is different about the process that you have proposed and you are initiating under the court direction? What is it that's different about your process than some of these others, and what might the expectations about the outcome be any different?
I think there's a couple things that right out from the start are very different. One is that it is an open, inclusive, participatory process that we're launching, where we're asking people from all sectors of the community to give in their ideas, to speak their voices about what they hope the future of police-community relations will be. So we're really starting from the bottom up in terms of getting voices from the youth, getting voices from the minority communities, getting voices from the Appalachian communities perhaps, from the police communities and their families, basically all the different sectors of Cincinnati who might have quite different visions and ideas. We're asking them in an open participatory process to tell us what they look for the future that's quite perhaps different from the present.
Are you saying that's different than these earlier studies as you understand them?
Earlier studies were really done by experts, and they resulted in reports on the one hand and sometimes in committees or organizations that are doing good work. We are in some ways building on that good work and broadening the place at the table. We're now saying the place at the table in addressing this problem, which is a problem for the whole community, is for everybody.
You know that back when the parties agreed to this and it came before council split 5-4, 5 supporting it, 4, 3 Republicans and the 1 Charterite voting against this process. Last week at council, those same 3 Republicans and 1 Charterite tried to make it clear that they weren't going to commit to doing anything ahead of time that comes out of this process. Given that kind of atmosphere going into this, how does that affect what you do, and does that put a cloud over it in any way?
By definition, this kind of work that we do here or in hotspots around the world begins with people having very different perceptions and experiences about what they think ought to be coming from the past and moving into the future. So their openness, their willingness to engage in this is at all different levels, and that's expected. I look forward to the community, the leaders, the organizations watching and engaging in this process, and I feel fairly confident that as they do, there will be a sense that this process is really promising, that it's going to provide an opportunity for Cincinnati to sing, that it's going to provide an opportunity for Cincinnati to be a model for how to engage and address these very, very deep, long-standing issues in ways that's collaborative instead of adversarial, in ways that's forward-looking instead of stuck in perhaps the past.
You know, one of the things that, and I think it probably has developed and is developing along a parallel path, and the time frames didn't exactly match up, but now these things are in close proximity to each other, is that the mayor's office has created the Cincinnati Can process to growing out of the riots of last month, which we don't know what the shape of that's going to be, but clearly the leadership of that talks about a community input, community meetings, community voice. How do these two processes match up, or are we just going to have them going on parallel lines with lots of community meetings going in lots of different directions?
We're working with the various leaders of the various initiatives, in particular with Cincinnati Can, to make sure that we intersect and dovetail where useful and as much as possible. There are all sorts of different needs for how we're going to address this problem. Again, ours begins from the grassroots up. Theirs, to some extent, begins from leadership down, and that's a very good partnership. So we need to continue to understand what each different initiative is trying to accomplish and where we need each other to accomplish our goals most effectively.
Do you have something going for, I mean, one, could we say, is it fair to say that in your particular situation, you're focused more narrowly, police-community relations, and secondly, you have something behind you, otherwise known as the federal courts, and you have some deadlines and some punch behind you at the end of this process that makes your process different than this bigger, more amorphous process?
Well,
or am I reading too much into that?
I think it certainly is part of what gives our process some legs to walk with. I think the other processes are also going to have their ways to walk and to move ahead in very constructive ways. So just focusing on ours, indeed, that we have a mandate, that we have federal legitimacy. I'm the special master of Judge Susan DeLotte.
And we should be clear about this. You have been appointed as a special master from the federal court. This wasn't just, gee, let's go out and find somebody to do some process work for us.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So that gives a great deal of legitimacy and authority to this process. However, the real legitimacy and the real voice that will empower this process is that of the community, is that of the people of Cincinnati. And that's really, I think, our very unique and very promising contribution here. As you said at the beginning, in the end we'll move towards a settlement back in the court, which we hope will have the same kind of participatory, collaborative process that we're looking forward to as the community gets engaged.
We're going to talk about the process in a little bit here, but I want, before we sort of get away from sort of the context of this, you know, police-community relations, this process with the federal court getting involved, driven by the ACLU, the United Black Front, in the beginning of this calendar year, we reached a certain point, but this is a dynamic situation. Things are going to keep happening. We all saw that last Wednesday when there was another shooting by a policeman of someone, an African American. Don't know all the details about that shooting yet, but this is going to continue to be a dynamic situation. You can't just stop things and say, okay, everybody stop now, we're going to do this study. How does that impact what you're going to do?
We're not really doing a study carved out in time. We're doing something which in itself is very dynamic, that we're asking people 3 questions essentially about the future. And that future can be near term, or that future can be a little bit more long term. So the questions are essentially, what are your goals for police-community relations?
Okay.
Why are those goals important to you? What are your values?
Which means different people will be coming at this from different perspectives with different values.
Absolutely. And we're really looking for all of those different perspectives, just as we have in the parties to the lawsuit. Right? In the parties to the lawsuit, we have the Fraternal Order of Police, we have the city administration, we have the Black United Front, and we have the ACLU. And these 4 sets of voices are coming obviously from different perspectives.
Are they all there with the same motivation to make this work?
I believe they are. It has been, we began this process before the riots, I think you know.
Yes, right.
As you reported. We began about 3 or 4 weeks before. And to move this group, which before I met with them, was a group that was designed to be an adversarial, really antagonistic group, to fight it out in the court of law, to begin to change this group, work with this group to become a collaborative, has been in itself very dynamic. I think we've been increasingly successful in an interesting way since the crisis, because the crisis generally has a way of focusing attention. And the people in this group, folks who don't usually sit around the same table and talk about meeting the same goals, have really been understanding that this is an opportunity to transform this crisis into something that really could be positive for Cincinnati.
So in that sense, crisis isn't necessarily a setback, it's something that focuses down and gets people serious about things. You know, you were talking about the 3 different questions, and I sort of got you off on on that second question.
Right.
So let's quickly, the first question is
what
do
are
you
your
want?
goals for police-community relations?
What are the values?
Why do you have those goals? And we really care about people's beliefs, identities, experiences, hurts, hopes, fears.
And what's the third?
And the third one grows out of the what and why question, and that is, how do you think those goals can best be accomplished? So we're moving not only from somewhat general, conceptual questions of what and why, we're asking people to really give us their best thinking about how.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the process so people understand where and how they can plug in. There are stages here, and some are include more people than others. Take us through those stages.
Okay, the first stage you're helping us do right now.
Okay.
And that we have labeled Cincinnati Sings. And that is a sort of an image that we're trying to suggest here, that we have all these different voices in Cincinnati. And perhaps recently these voices have had a lot of dissonance. We've been calling it crisis. Now what we're trying to say is that we have an opportunity for some resonance.
Where will people be able to sing?
First of all, they're going to be able to sing within their own groups. So the best way to make music, of course, is to tune up your own instrument, is to be clear about your own voice. And so that's how we're going to start. We're going to ask people within different community and organizational and professional groups to get together and to say, out of this group of families of police line officers, these are my goals. Out of the group of youth, these are my goals. Out of the group of city officials, these are my goals. We're actually starting with a pilot in a few weeks with executives of social service organizations and religious leaders. They're going to help us kick this thing off.
So those are those first groups.
That's going to be our first
groups.
That's right.
And then where do we go from there?
Well, after each group, first of all, even before meeting as groups, people speak as members of those groups.
Okay.
So we're going to be going out into the community and saying to people, here is a questionnaire for you.
Okay.
And we're going to help people fill these out by paper and pencil. We have a way for them to fill it out on the internet, and we'll be doing some few interviews with people.
All right.
And that will be a way for them to begin expressing their voice. Now, one thing I want to say about this, there's been some question about confidentiality that I think has been fairly well cleared up, but I'd like to underline it again. This is an open, participatory, inclusive process. There is only one place where we have a federal order to preserve privacy, and that's people's names. People's names are going to be sealed under federal court order so that nobody feels that there's any risk for really saying what they want to say.
I'm very aware of time, so I want to, in these early stages, there's going to be this sort of individual thing, chance, then inside of groups, then there's going to be opportunity to bring some of those groups together, sort of shared visioning, is that correct?
Exactly.
And then you go back into sort of figuring out what the plan is and the implementation. And rather than get bogged down in, since we're in the early stages, if people want to be sure that they can be involved in this, what do they do? How do they get in touch?
Well, we have an office. A lot of different Cincinnati organizations and community groups have been donating to help this happen. So Christ Church has given us office space. Our meeting rooms are going to be held. Our meetings are going to be held there. So if people want to reach us, they can send us to the ARIA group, care of Christ Church in Cincinnati.
Which is at 4th and Sycamore, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
We're just now getting up to speed, but there will be. We're starting to staff it and will be available. If people want to volunteer, we're going to need a lot of volunteers.
Okay.
We are operating, despite what may have been projected as a lot of money, we're operating on a shoestring.
Okay. Sorry we're out of time, but we're going to have you back because this is a year-long process. Yes. So right now, people get in contact with you and you will get back to them.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Because this is very important for our entire community. Thank you. Stay tuned. After years of dreaming and planning, the Contemporary Arts Center will break ground in downtown this week for its new home. And it is meant to challenge the way you and I look at the city and ourselves.
It's a long-standing tradition that museums use good architects, but the recent trend we're seeing is that museums all over the country are using very avant-garde architects. You're seeing this in Cincinnati, obviously, with the design for the Contemporary Art Center by Zaha Hadid, an architect from London who's considered by some people to be very adventurous and out there. But this is part of a much bigger national trend that we're seeing in a lot of cities using European architects and architects who have a real cutting edge in the field.
Welcome back. After years of dreaming and planning, the Contemporary Arts Center will break ground for its new home this Thursday afternoon at noon. To talk about the new building, I am joined by Charles Desmarais, the Allison Harris Weston Director of the Contemporary Arts Center. Charles, welcome back.
Thank you, Dan.
To Newsmakers. You've been dreaming and planning, and in the last few years, you've really been trying to refine the design so that you can begin construction. We had you on, I think I checked, it was like 2 years ago, really, when the Hadid design was originally introduced. What's really happened? What's changed in those 2 years?
Well, frankly, I don't think that people who would look at the model back then and the model today would see a lot of change. I mean, for one thing, what we showed was more abstract and more of a sort of concept. And basically, the building has stayed the same, although there have been, of course, there's always adjustments. Right. At one point, we thought we might have a full-scale restaurant. Now we're having simply a coffee bar. The gallery space that we thought was going to be about 30,000 square feet is actually probably going to be about 24,000 square feet.
But those are adjustments.
Exactly.
The fundamental sort of daring design is still there.
I am sure of that, and I think the response in the architecture press and among critics bears that out. Yeah.
Well, you know, we just heard from Kathleen McQuiggan. She and her partner Peter Plegans wrote in Newsweek about, I don't know, it was a month and a half ago or so, about all the new art museums. I want to pick up another soundbite that when I interviewed Kathleen, and then we'll hear from her, and then we'll let you respond, okay?
All right. Is this a trap?
I think there have been institutions in the past which tried to find very interesting avant-garde architecture, and 10 years later, it looks a little bit dated.
Buildings can go out of date, buildings cannot work. You have a range of things that are absolutely wonderful for a long period of time. I mean, I think everybody pretty much agrees that I.M. Pei's East Wing in the National Gallery in Washington more or less works. It's nice to be in. The Pompidou in Paris was nice for about 20 years. And I think a lot of people were surprised at how soon the thing had to be completely rebuilt.
Well, is the Hadid design interesting today, or is it enduring tomorrow?
Well, I sure hope that our building has to be rebuilt after 10 years if it's for the same reasons that the Pompidou had to be rebuilt, because it's been so heavily used. I mean, it just was ready to fall apart because it was used 10, 20, I don't know how many times more than people had expected. So, you know, you always take a chance, and obviously the Contemporary Art Center is particularly about taking chances. I mean, it is in the soul of this institution, and has been since 1962, to promote the new, to try things out, to be, as we've said, the research and development arm for culture in Cincinnati. I hate to say that we're taking a very large gamble with the $34 million that has been contributed to this project by many private individuals and corporations and city and state. And of course, we're doing a lot to try to assure that this is a building of lasting value. But sure, I mean, fashions go in and out, and I think if you look at the Guggenheim in New York, you'll see a building that was very, very dramatically surprising when it opened in the early 50s. Sort of, you know, went through a period of looking a little dated, and now is considered one of the greatest works of 20th century architecture. So.
Okay, so you're taking a chance, but that's why you exist.
Well, exactly.
And Lord knows somebody in Cincinnati ought to take a chance on something, right?
Well, thank you.
What we don't need is one more red brick building. That's me saying, not you. Okay, let's take a look at some of the details of this. And one of the things is the relationship of the exterior and interior spaces of the Hadid design are particularly interesting. Again, Kathleen McQuiggan of Newsweek.
It's for a downtown street, and it deals with the street. It invites people walking by to come in. It's a design that really has ideas in it about bringing the street into the museum and moving up and sort of creating a street within the museum, and about using glass as a transparency. You know, museums 100 years ago were all built in a very kind of elitist style, with great big steps running up to big columned fronts. They looked like courthouses. Who wants to go to the courthouse?
Yeah. We don't, any of us know an art museum that looks like a courthouse? No, I'm not going to go there. So this idea of the CAC really just merging into the street and inviting people in.
That's very much a part of what the Contemporary Art Center has been about since it moved downtown. You know, originally the center was founded in the basement of the Cincinnati Art Museum, and in the 60s it moved downtown. In 1970, the current space was built. And the idea really is to engage the community much more directly. Contemporary art is, and particularly our museum, is much less about paintings on a wall than experiences that people have outside their normal boundaries. And contemporary art is frequently engaged in the political discussions of our time. We want to be sort of on the street. Zaha calls the project that she's, or the part of the project that brings people into the street, the urban carpet. And what it basically is that the sidewalk, the concrete sidewalk, becomes the concrete ground floor lobby space, and then that curls up and becomes the back wall. Very literally, I mean, there's this big curl at the back of the wall, which we saw in that clip, and becomes the back wall of the building. So that urban carpet is meant to sort of symbolize the effort to sort of invite people in and up into the building.
You just made an interesting statement. Contemporary art is meant to be engaged with the community as it is right now. This community is in crisis right now.
That's true.
Does contemporary art have something to contribute to the process that we're going through?
I would like to think so. I mean, I don't think that the issues are much, much larger than the poor artist can deal with. But if we have an opportunity to see the world through somebody else's eyes, if we, you know, if I can get some sense of how you see the world, well, then I'm maybe one step closer to the kind of understanding that I think we so desperately need. We're doing an exhibition that opens June 22nd. It's been planned for 2 years, but it's very fortuitous. This is work by a woman named Adrienne Piper, who's a philosopher at one of the women's colleges. She is an African American who has dealt with that whole question of how people of different backgrounds communicate, and it's very much a part of today's discussion, it seems to me.
As a way to get people engaged in the new Contemporary Art Center, and maybe in a way that we all should be more, there is a groundbreaking this Thursday at noon, and people are invited, right? Everybody is invited. And it's going to be along between 6th and 7th along Walnut Street.
That's right. The
where the new site is, and it's going to close it down. So people are invited at noon. There's some information about it, and everybody should come. So anyway, Thank you. See you on Thursday.
Very much. Thank you.
And we'll follow this as the building goes up. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men who are shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.